Players Pick Podcast, Picks and Perspective with Chris Johnson.
Episode 11, Tosin Abasi, Animals as Leaders. One of my absolute favorite guitarists on the planet. We talk about guitar picks and metaphysics. Listen to his music on the Players Pick podcast playlist on Spotify.
I've given you the 420 pick, yeah?
No.
No? This is the brand new Flow 420. It's a 4.2.
This is like those V picks or something.
Kinda, yeah. It's like in that sense where it's a plec.
It's like
a plectrum.
mega thick. Wow.
It's like the neck though.
Yeah.
So in the way that your asymmetrical neck and like the extra grip and the way you don't have to close as hard.
Yeah.
So
these are a vibe. Like I fucked around with some like super thick picks in the past.
Okay.
The beveling I think is really where you experience like a different engagement of the string. And so with a really thick one, you have quite a bit of surface contact on the pick, and
That's right.
Yeah, and it's got weight to it too. Like Nuno was telling me he hated wearing rings when he played. He would never wear them, and then he kind of like started wearing this one ring, and then one day he went on stage without it, and he was like, "What the fuck?" And he realized that the ring was like a noticeable little counterweight. So when he was like, and he's like, so now he plays with it. Yeah, so having a bit of
little heft.
Yeah, it anchors you in some way, versus like some of these virtually have no weight. So it's all, I mean, it's good. There's so many, these all look like they have some value to someone. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like first, people are really trying to play.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, if you're just doing this, that's chill too, and you need the right pick for that. But this shit is about like, I'm playing one fucking note at a time. You know what I mean?
Dude, it's so sharp and it's so stiff. But I can't wait. I mean, Loomis is going to be he's really stoked actually on that. I have hated this pick. The Tortex version of this is Altem, but I've hated the one because I'm like, that is the wrongest fucking pick, right?
It looks like so sharp.
It's so sharp, and it's just like it. There's so much opportunity for failure, basically, because you can have this. I mean, you can be this far in the string so easily, and you don't need to be that deep, like. Mm-hmm. You need to be choked up, But I guess it's the more precise player is able to do that. That's why the flow shape is like the opposite thing, because it bowls out and keeps you above the string. And same with like a jazz 3 shape in comparison. It acts a little bit as a depth gauge.
I'm gonna have to mess around with those.
Yeah, I'll leave some of those. The Players Pick Podcast, episode 11, with Tosin Abasi.
Thompson Appleby.
Tobin Arasi, I like that.
So like my name, people mess up my name all the time, and then
Starbucks or line or whatever, like Tobin.
Yeah, or just I'll even read interviews and like they'll be like Tobin. I'll be like, this is print, and you've seen my name in print. Like what?
Like, you probably have my email.
Yeah.
And it says very clearly what my name is.
Yeah, it happens all the time. So then we started messing around with just like owning the mispronunciations and just. So yeah, Tony Abasi.
Tony Abasi.
That's what we started doing on Generation X. We were in Long Island. Yeah, Tony Abasi from Long Island. He plays guitar. He's pretty good.
He's all right. Yeah.
Tony Abasi, yeah.
He plays the notes. He goes to weedly wee, and we let him do it.
What do you want?
Let's go. What do you want? Well, you're neck deep in the whole like guitar thing now.
Yes.
And it seems like we're kind of on an uptick at the moment. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, in general, it's definitely like there was a spark of inspiration to make my own shape, and I was with Ibanez at the time, and I spent 2 years prototyping with them, and not because it takes 2 years, but because the space between iterations when you're working with a large company like that can be literally a quarter of a year. So if you need to make one small change, you might have to wait 3-4 months to get the next iteration. So I began to, feel like maybe there was a better circumstance or scenario where I could be, creating guitars. And the Ibanez relationship, I'd been with them for over a decade, but I definitely felt like, man, it'd be cool to not just have to do one 8-string fan fret and maybe offer 6 strings, or maybe offer a 7, or maybe do the same shape in a semi-hollow. So I was just like, eventually it culminated in me like finding the right moving parts to strike out on my own. But the past year has been interesting in that regard on the production level. But we're back on top. We have a new manufacturer, Grover Jackson, and we're gonna be at NAMM with those guitars with some cool surprises. So
cool.
So yeah, shit's cool.
It's good. It's moving.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, I'm curious. Where did your relationship with guitar picks start? Where did it begin? And like, can you take us through, like, maybe who gave it to you, or like, what you remember, if you remember what it was, and like, how many picks have you gone through, what styles and picks have you gone through to get to where you're at now?
No one has ever asked me this question.
Yes.
But I've been asked a lot of questions. What are you doing here? Whose underwear are these?
Whoa.
It's like,
not yours? Damn it.
What was I gonna say? No, the picks. It's super. It's a good question, because when I first started playing guitar, I just used a guitar pick. It was like the Fender Tortex picks. They're like tortoise shells, or whatever.
Yeah, tortoise shell.
Yeah, and they're just like the free ones in a bowl at your local music store.
Yeah.
To me, that was a guitar pick, and it was just like, it didn't matter. I used to use a penny.
What?
Yeah, like if I didn't have a pick, I sucked at guitar. You know what I'm saying? I just needed to strum power chords, and if I had lost all my picks, I'd find a penny and play with that. It wasn't until I discovered guys like Paul Gilbert and Yngwie Malmsteen and John Petrucci. I think it was John Petrucci that I discovered the Jazz 3.
Oh, okay.
And then I was like, oh, this makes sense. And I went and bought some, and that became my pick of choice for years and years. Mm-hmm. And then with the extended range guitar, you get like into, the thickness of the strings that almost gets into bass territory. The gauges just go up, and you start to feel like there may be better ways of engaging that string than with like a 1.4, like, maybe it's a pick that has a bit of flex in it works better against a really thick string. Mm-hmm. Now, I've seen bass players use kind of like, maybe like a .73 or something, and it kind of, not flops, but it reminds me of like a playing card in between the spokes of a bicycle wheel. Like
more of a snap.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when you're doing a lot of economy picking and sweep picking, like, sometimes it's nice to have the pick flow like that, right?
Right.
So I started experimenting with thinner picks, and we were doing like the Black Eye stuff.
Mm-hmm. You had the D'Addario thing with the picks for a while.
Yeah. And then, it's always been for me, I like the ones that are smaller than standard size, that are close to the Jazz 3 thing, but I've messed around with various thicknesses. And right now, what am I playing now?
You're playing the Prime Tone.
But what size is it?
It's like a 1.4.
Yeah, so it's a pretty thick pick.
It's more of a basic Jazz 3 thickness, but it's got that speed bevel and the grip
bevel.
on it.
The whole beveling thing to me is sick, and you get a type of timbre and like attack off the string, and it also flows in a certain way. So to me, that's my thing, like, lately.
Yeah.
For the past few years, actually.
Yeah, because we did. If we back up, there was it was probably been almost 3.5 years ago that we did the Animals Leader pick, which is a 73 thickness Prime Tone Jazz 3 XL, right? So so it's the larger one. You and Javier settled on the larger pick at the time, although you had been more of a Jazz 3, the smaller. And
there's a weird thing. Some players I talk to, like, they just switch up their pick out of nowhere, and they're like, "Yeah, now I'm using these," and it's kind of like maybe the contrast is what. Like, I don't think there's just one tool for the job, and I've definitely talked to a few players who kind of are still moving that needle around to, like, and for 1 year they might be on thick picks, and then the next year they might be on thin picks, and then they might, do you know what I mean?
Yep.
Yeah.
I do. especially after us releasing these flow picks this last year, I gravitate towards the 73 and the 88s because they're close to the Animals 73 pick, right? And that snap, and there's a brightness to them, and I love the grip and the whole thing. But in the process, I had to go through and test all the different gauges and all the different bevels, and I'm like, man, I could settle on any one of these at any given day. Like if I just pick one up and I just relax and act like there's not another 25 different picks on my desk to choose from, and just play with that pick, I'll tune into it.
Totally.
And then it was just listening and watching the response to these picks, and there was like, we only went up to 3.0, and somebody was like, man, if they just did like a 4-point or maybe like one of those old school 5.0 like big picks that was like really comfy in the hand, you know. I was like, oh man, I'll talk to the boss and see what he would do, and that's how the 420 came. Like that's what we did, the 420, so we wanted to kind of just put it in the realm of, you know, like for those guys, but not go crazy, because it's probably you'll end up seeing like it's probably one of the more usable thick picks because the bevel is so expertly done.
Nice. Yeah. And I feel like you're right on the threshold of thickness where it's not too crazy thick. Like it's an interesting feel, and I think like if I was playing like a hollow body, I think I would like that. You know, acoustic guitars for some reason. Not strummy, but if I'm doing like single note jazz stuff. Sure.
Yeah, I've had a handful of the Django type folks pick these and go, yeah, that's totally what we're looking for. You know?
Makes sense.
So do you remember who was it that got you into guitar? Like, was there a dad or an uncle or somebody, or did you just kind of do it on your own?
My friend Steve Gordon, when I was like in middle school, when I was in elementary school at the time, he was a little bit older than me, and he was taking guitar lessons, and I would notice the guitar in his living room. And we were just into like playing Street Fighter and like rollerblading and stuff. Sure. But I was already in the school orchestra playing clarinet, so I knew how to read music, and I understood subdivision and key signatures. Clarinet was not relevant to any of the music I listened to. I was listening to whatever was on MTV, and I'm playing this random, you know, woodwind instrument. So I'd see his guitar, and I'd be like, I just asked him to show me something one day, and he showed me like a bit of Metallica 1, you know, the entry. Yeah. Which is that riff is funny because it's so, it's beautifully simple. It's iconic, but it's simple enough for like a beginner to learn. But it's strong enough to be kind of like this. You hear those few notes.
Metallica's got a handful of those.
Yeah, there's something to that. So I remember trying to make my fingers cooperate and kind of liking that challenge. And then I forget, maybe I would come back over and like kind of fiddle with it, you know, periodically until the point where I was like, I asked my dad to get me a guitar. And he got me like a Strat knockoff. But I'm realizing now that playing guitar is a flow state. Like it's a state, it's like a psychological, or it's a state of consciousness where you can forget about the passage of time, or you can be unaware of how much time has passed. You feel like a coherence. Your attention is so dialed in, and you're kind of like in this state of, you know, it's like a flow state. Cyclists experience this, like marathon runners, like dancers. It's just this mental space to where you're in the flow. That's where it comes from. I only realize this now because I've started thinking about things in this way, because I'm a seeker of flow states. It's like why I like, you know, high speed. I like driving, you know, like on the track. You're literally like feeling like lateral G's. You're feeling, you know, like braking distances. You're using visual, like spatial intelligence as along with like reaction time. You're managing fear, you know, impulse response, and the confluence of all those inputs creates like a unified state. And I also experience it when I'm doing like weightlifting and trying to like do a complex lift, you know. So I'm like, oh wait, I just like flow states, you know. And so the guitar, I think, emerged to me as one of those rabbit holes that like you don't even question why, you just like are down to spend multiple hours like struggling to do a thing.
Yeah, digging in.
Yeah.
It's interesting when I hear you talk about that too, because The flow. I can eventually get to the flow state through multiple different ways. You know, I'm into yoga and like and running and stuff like that too. But I almost as you tell me about your different experiences, I see it as like it's kind of like the narrowing of focus, right? So you're the narrowing of focus into this one thing, letting all these other things fall away, especially in the driving, especially because there's that fear element. Right, you might have a little bit of fear element in your weightlifting or trying something new, like in inversion or like in a yoga practice or something like that. But the fear probably isn't as much there in the guitar until you're trying out new material on stage or something like that, right?
Yeah. And fear is on the continuum, I think, of challenge or uncertainty. And so I feel like at the far end of that continuum is like fear for your life, like. Am I going to drive into this wall at turn 3 at 130 miles an hour? Or am I going to drive off of this mountain? You know what I mean? But then there's also, you know, if you go to the other pole, it's kind of like, I think that fear is visceral, and so it demands a level of like focus, and there's a consequence, right? But if we're talking about missing a lift, there's also a consequence. Or
100%.
A balance beam, there's also a consequence. Or doing a lick, there's a slight element of fear in not achieving it. And so when you have to demand something of your body, it's an interesting experience because it's like you are in control, but you don't know if your body's going to cooperate fully. And you spend all this time strengthening the connection between your consciousness and having your body do exactly what you want your consciousness to do. And that relationship is like a conversation that not everyone is consciously having. Yoga is an art form that is like dead set on establishing the relationship between consciousness and body.
Right.
But it's available in these other ways. And like,
totally.
Yeah, learning the violin and you're like, well, my vibrato's too wide and my intonation, and your brain knows it, but your fingers aren't cooperating until they are. Do you know what I mean? And it's this conversation that you can strengthen that relationship between mind and body, and so the guitar is totally a pursuit like that, you know?
I agree. Yeah, the refinement of like just like when you in a young as a young person, you're learning to walk and you're even refining like what it is that keeps you upright, you know, as a kid, and you're not like cognitively like trying to figure it out too hard. It's just something that you're innately drawn to do. But in this scenario, it's I could actually think the fear factor actually does play into the lick. Now that you say that, I've totally just, especially in performance at home, it's like one thing, but like or in the studio, it's another thing too because you're wasting time.
To me, that's the worst in the studio.
Is it worse for you?
Yeah, like we call it. I've heard it called the red light syndrome.
Totally.
So I'm recording you, and you totally know how to play this thing.
Yeah.
But as soon as you hit me, you see me hit record, you're like, fuck. And you got to do 15 takes to get it right.
Yeah.
And then when I'm not recording, you nail it.
Yep.
So if this happens, like no matter if you've done 4 albums or 0 albums, it's kind of funny.
Yeah.
But yeah, like there's a net, like the subjective experience is interesting because there's a meta layer to where there's you watching you. So you're like, come on, dude, you can do this. You're having a conversation with yourself, but if you think about it, that's actually weird because there aren't multiple yous, right? But a lot of the things we do require perspective on ourselves. Or subjectively, we're scared, but mentally, mentally we were like, there's nothing to be afraid of, but we can't defeat the fear that's in our bodies. And it's like, that's part of, there's mastery in learning, guitar or whatever, but there's mastery of the self, which is mastering fear, mastering all these things. And the guitar is like a weird little like portal into the fact that we are mastering things all over the place, and there are things you can't do until you can do them with application of the will, so it totally emerges this like almost this like analogy to like my wider life. It's like, dude, I remember when I couldn't play a power chord. I remember now I can sweep pick.
Yeah.
And it's the same me, and like those little victories.
Is it though?
I don't know. Yeah, isn't it? It's like me 2.0 or something.
I mean, the you that couldn't play a power chord I mean, that body, that brain has been totally been replaced multiple times.
Like literally.
Literally.
That's true. Whoa. Okay. So then I guess it isn't me. But then you get into the question: what constitutes you? Is it yourself? You know.
This is a really interesting. This is the kind of questions I like and I'm interested in because I don't know. Have you ever heard? Have you seen that KROS-One like speech, like the YouTube thing where he's talking about Rockstar? Have you seen this?
No.
I was just hanging out with Steph Carpenter,
Sick.
Deftones, and he was like, we were got into this big stony talk, you know, and he was like, bro, I started understanding God in a different way, like after I had KRS-One, like, preach it to me. And I was like, what? Really? Like, he's like, yeah, here. Flipped it on, and it's this whole kind of lecture about how he's like, okay, I want you to look, because it was just what was laying around. It had a Rockstar Energy Drinks, like, sticker, right? Like, he's done it in other talks with other things, but he held it up, and he's like, look, okay, you guys can all read this. Like, now, without using your mouth, we're on the count of 3, we're all going to say it to ourselves, Rockstar, right? And he gets counts, and you do it with him, and he's like, okay, you heard that, right? Like, you heard yourself say it, but your ears didn't hear it.
Yeah.
Your mouth didn't move.
Yeah.
What was that?
Yeah.
That spoke, and what was that heard? You know, and he gets into this long thing about what is self a little bit, you know, and then he translates it into talk about the 5th dimension, the inner and the outer verses, like, and he has all this kind of long thing, but it's a really, really interesting, like, question that he's posing. It's like he's talking, basically that's how he understands, and how Steph Carpenter was telling me how he understands, like, God is people, like, it's the inner voice in all of us.
It's
that type of thing.
Yeah, it's consciousness, which is fundamentally mysterious because we actually don't understand it. Where is it emanating from? Is it coming out of your brain? Is it coming out of your gut? Is it a field that surrounds your whole body? What's the perimeter? Is it super wide? Is it super narrow? Is it like, we don't have empirical answers for the phenomena of consciousness, but it actually is the most salient part of being a human, is like your identity and the thoughts in your head and the feelings and all these things. It's like, that's you. I mean, I could put your head in a jar and you no longer have a body, but you'll still have a conscious experience. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And it's kind of like, yeah. So we're in relationship to this thing that we don't fully understand, but is completely intrinsic to our experience as humans. And you know, music is like one of these things that like totally turns on an on switch for consciousness, and it's an outlet for consciousness, and it actually like is a magnet. Like, we all resonate with certain music, you know. There are dead composers that we still talk about. There are songs that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So as musicians, we're really playing in that playground of like consciousness. You know, it's like, without being explicit about it, we're really kind of channeling our consciousness through these tools to like kind of show ourselves to other people, you know?
It's actually part of one of my favorite things about music, especially instrumental music or music that doesn't weigh heavy on words, is the fact that it's an expression, because our experience as humans, you know, if you were to try to encapsulate it, you know, you could categorize it as ineffable, like unspeakable, like the grand experience, because you could write your entire life and try to encapsulate your feeling or your experience, but you're going to fall short of the actuality of it, right? Like, it's just a finger pointing to the moon. It's not, the finger's not the moon, you know, like you can't speak about that necessarily, but you can point towards it with the words. And with music, and especially all different genres of instrumental music, I find that the expression of one's experience is actually more pure, you know, in that way, because it's not divided by categorical, you know, phenomenon, which our language.
Yeah, language is a bit of a prison of concepts. It's totally necessary, but it falls short of like some of the most, when you get into the abstract and the infinite and the, you know what I mean, then our language ceases to be adequate to describe some of the most powerful experiences available to people.
Right.
And so, yeah, that's why I make instrumental music, because you escape words, and then what the idea is to kind of like hit the listener not on the verbal level of communication, but on like that maybe emotional space. But not emotional because of what I said, but because of what you're hearing. Like, it's interesting that melody and rhythm have an impact on your emotional state. Like why? So the certain order of certain notes divided in a beat has it, that coherence distinguishes itself from noise, right? So we can tell what's noise or what's atonal to what's a rhythm and what's a melody. And then there's harmony. And then beyond that, the organization of those notes has certain effects on our mental state. Sad songs, happy songs, like urgency, distress, songs that make you want to dance and give you energy, songs that you would play at like a funeral, songs you worship to, right? So it's really interesting that like there's the phenomena of sound that the brain is in conversation with, and it's different than language, but it's a type of communication. You know? Mm-hmm. So musicians are kind of like, it's kind of like a, I don't know, not like a magician, but there's like a...
Oh, very much like, if not actually, in a way, you know, because there is a conjuring, there is a, you end up being a conduit and like I see it more as a channel, so to speak, for universal, like whatever your particular incarnation is open to, susceptible to, and you know, it's like you talk about. It makes me think. I've been reading. There's these two really great audiobooks that got passed to me by Carlo Rovelli. I think he's an Italian guy, and he did this book called The Order of Time, and it's just incredible. I mean, it's like it'll blow your mind, like, because it starts off by reminding or telling you that we're at this point. It was only written released a couple of years ago, so it's fairly current. And he's talking about kind of updating the world on quantum gravity and like and how it interacts in the quantum theory and how it interacts with Einstein's general relativity, and how on the surface they kind of don't work together, but then you go through the book and he's like, and this is where they come together and all this stuff, right? But he starts off in this place kind of telling you, like, we have the ability to measure time so precisely now that we know without a doubt that time moves slower closer to the water's edge. Time moves faster in the mountains. Right, like for the person that experiences time, and then it goes, and there's all these different equations, and like now they could set a timepiece on this table right here, and set a timepiece here, and within a few hours detect a small discrepancy, and now that's really micro, you know, versus the mountains and the sea.
It's like atomic clocks or something.
But and then they go on to realize that there is that part of the quantum thing that gets saved by Einstein's relativity is that there is no all-pervading now in the universe. They've figured out that there is no all-pervading now. It's relative to each person experiencing time, and you personally have your own time. Like there is literally like we're sharing a time right now, you know, but there's still an element about you and your flux, your fission as a human being as you move and generate heat that produces a certain kind of time for you. So it's kind of interesting that sometimes we say, "Oh, well, they're on their own time," you know,
right.
Like they'll show up in their own time, you know, these type of things, and that we find out that the time isn't actually like outside of us. Outside of the experience, it's not. Time isn't in a part of the equation.
Like an objective phenomenon.
It's not an objective phenomenon that you can measure. So where does time come? It comes from
the experience of
the
time.
experience of, and it comes from the experience of relationship to things, right? To the phenomena of the world.
Which is relativity.
Which is relativity.
Circles back.
So in music, circling it back to music, it's an interesting thing to be a musician and playing with time.
Yeah.
And bringing rhythm and melody. So you're subdividing time up and giving emotive qualities to the time, right? Because like Alan Watts would always say, it's like, like for example, like for musicians or dancers, like if we were always looking for the quickest way, then the best songs would be and done, right?
Yeah.
It'd be over with. It's like, but that's not it. We do it for the sake of doing it because the feeling of how it kind of alleviates us from the feeling of time, so to speak, at times. Like it kind of lifts the burden a little bit.
Right.
Depending on what you're listening to and what the intention is. I think.
Well, that sounds like the flow state thing.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Because in that flow state, right, it feels timeless to some degree. Like you're not burdened by future pasts.
You're not even, the passage of time ceases to be on your radar, and you're so enrolled in what you're doing that it could have been 12 hours or 12 minutes. It's you no longer are paying attention to time. Like you're above it.
Right.
Yeah. Shit's wild.
Well, and because if we're the ones that are actually generating the concept and the quality of of time, I mean, then it's kind of up to us to find a way outside or next to it, through utilizing our abilities in relationship to the phenomena of the world. So like, and we're at such an apex of human history right now. I mean, like in a lot of ways, right? Whether there's a lot of negativity that comes with it.
Well, that could be part of an apex, but it's just like, how long is the story going to go, and have we even really begun? Do you know what I mean? Yeah. There are thresholds that could be crossed that will make the previous period before seem like
child's play, right?
Like a prequel. Like the plot has the plot started. Like, do you know what I'm saying? Like, there could be advancements to like lifespan or like merging consciousness with technology that would make all periods before just be like a decidedly different. It's like, that was before the event, or that was before the threshold. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, like that singularity concept.
Yeah. Which, is slightly more specific, but it's interesting when you're like, we're at an apex. It's like, by a lot of metrics we are, but then it's like, we don't really know what season 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are going to bring. So like, how far are we into the human story? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, we could be right at the end. We could be right at.
We might be at the beginning. I mean, before there was electricity, there's kind of like, the germ theory of disease, or before literacy was prevalent, or there's so many thresholds that humans have crossed that have like irrevocably changed what it means to be human, or at least on a societal or cultural level, right? Which is basically what we are is who we are in relativity to who we know. Like sometimes I think about like if I was in a hunter-gatherer society and no one had figured out true temperament or like Western harmony, like music maybe is a thing that everyone in the village does and they use their voices to do it, but no one has strung up a guitar and like divided the fretboard up in these equidistant spaces to create skill. And so then no one is composing music on a polyphonic level because there was no technology available to even like realize that, right? Mm-hmm. And so like what we are is in constant conversation with what we allow ourselves to be through an expansion of what's possible. Right? So humans are constantly expanding because of how we're pushing the boundaries of what's available to us.
Can you imagine each age too is probably thought the end was like, we know that. We know that like from biblical times, they're like the end is nigh. Yeah. Right? Like get your shit straight, people.
Yeah.
Because like it's all going to go to hell in a handbasket. Like, and here we all are these thousands of years later, and so many ages in between. And with each advent of new technology or new understanding, we have Copernicus and all these people like shunned for their newfound knowledge and understanding of the world we're living in, and each one thinking, "Oh no, this is it. We're done." Like
that's why when you're like, apex, I'm like,
yeah. We think as far as we know,
Yes.
You know, like,
and we know a lot.
We know a decent amount.
And not all knowledge is incremental. Some of it like blows the doors wide open, and we like once we had discovered subatomic particles, right? Or once we discovered, you know, before we had a germ theory of disease, we thought that like spirits are the reason like your baby died at the age of 5, or the reason you coughed yourself to death. Like we didn't know it was like literally there are organisms that are like you can't see them with the naked eye, but they are like abundant and prevalent, and they collect in certain like standing water or rotting meat or rotten fruit, and like there's a lot of folk knowledge in this where it's like there's food taboos of what to avoid and why, but no one really knew that like E. coli was like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And now there's a whole narrative layer removed because it's like you're not possessed, you just have schizophrenia. Do you know what I'm saying? But before that, it was like...
But it's interesting. I will just to play on the other side of that fence, though. It's interesting to consider that because now that we know so little. Mm-hmm. Even though we know enough to know that we can like sense like a tiniest sliver of the actual electromagnetic spectrum.
I know.
So what we can detect in comparison is just like this. You know, tiny little sliver, and then there's this whole wide other scenario that could be affecting our scenario. Spirits, quote unquote, right? It could be all kinds of other phenomena that are undetectable at this time.
Totally.
That could play a part in it. But not to get like ghost hunters on you, but like, you know, just saying that because we're at that place of quantum mechanics and understanding of things are just not what we originally thought they were. Mm-hmm. That you can almost go back and say, anything's possible.
Well,
in
it
a way.
definitely is a question mark, and to fill the space with assumptions is one choice, but it definitely, I think you should have a healthy degree of skepticism, but also a healthy degree of like, I don't fucking know, meaning like
100%.
Humility. Like you really highlighted something where it's like, we can monitor the spectrum of, the electromagnetic spectrum of light and all this stuff with tools. But before that, we just had our eyes and ears, and we can see like less than 1 millionth of, you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. But now we have electron microscopes, and I think about the fact that like we're sitting here and there's Wi-Fi signals, there's ultraviolet light, there's like fucking, there's
sunlight. Yeah, you got all these.
Yeah, but the spectrum of sunlight available to us versus but all this stuff is floating around and we're effectively blind to it. And we have tools that can measure it, but you just mentioned that those tools are also only so effective, and there may be on the continuum of reality things that exceed our ability to measure that may actually blow away certain concepts we have now or expand our idea of what is quote unquote real. Mm-hmm. So, and some of those things might actually circle back to sounding like miracles or sounding like supernatural or sounding like. So yeah, it's like.
Well, it's oftentimes the one that has gone before, the one that has found the next level, looks like a messiah to the people that have no clue as to how you, like, just for example, with you and guitar, right? Like, the guy that just finds your music mm-hmm. and just picked up the guitar last week looks and hears Animal's music and is like, dude, godlike Messiah, this doesn't even make sense to me. Like, this is alien language, but because as soon as they attempt to understand like what it feels like, but because they can't see from A to B,
all the steps.
Yeah, but then so then that's why there's the concept, and there's like folklore around like beings that are outside of our ability to detect, right? Like, again, that's, you can get on assumptions and go that route, but there's always like, seems like there's a little bit of like interesting kernels of potentiality in some of that stuff,
Well, I think you're highlighting, I don't think it's arbitrary that people are ascribing phenomena to beings that are like either supernatural or above human, and I think for a few reasons, but for one, most of what it means to be human is like what takes place in your mind. We were just talking about this.
Sure, yeah.
And even your sense of identity, like, who are you? Well, if I'm living in feudal Japan, then maybe I'm, I grow rice and the emperor exists and like I can't there's all these things, right? Or if I live in, Denmark in the year 2019, maybe I'm a coder and I'm also pansexual and I'm also like, these identities are new. You couldn't have been these things. Like, so like even what it is to be a person is relative to when you are being that person.
That's the theory of relativity coming back around too.
Well, that's a pretty adventurous application of
but to find, I mean, to say that truth is relative is not a far stretch. Like your truth is relative to you and your experience and where you come from and how you've been conditioned. It's my truth is relative, and if they can prove that you have your own time and I have my own time, then we're definitely in a place of like relativism. In a sense, like it's hard to say what exactly is the real thing. I mean, all the atoms of the things that we experience, including our own bodies, are filled up with mostly empty space.
Yeah, it's wild.
So there's
an irony to that truth because like how viable is it? So like, there's the idea that we're all made of stardust, right? Because all matter emerged from a single point.
Yeah.
But like, if I'm in traffic and my boss told me that if I'm late one more time, I'm gonna lose my job. But I'm also made of stardust, right?
Right.
But it's kind of like
so that's what they call paradox, right? Like yes, you are stardust, and you're about to be fired. All right, so stop being late.
So like, how viable is that truth? And you know what I mean? And like, at moments it is, but at moments it isn't. And the subjective experience is really funny because all you have to do is look up to realize that like you're on a sphere that's like traveling at like thousands of kilometers an hour, like through space, that's like surrounded by a thin atmosphere that created parameters that are like in the perfect conditions to produce carbon-based life. And you somehow are a member of a species of primate that somehow exceeds the intelligence of every other life form that's existed on the planet, like through multiple mass extinctions. All you have to do is look up at the moon and be like, there is an endless void right outside of our atmosphere with heavenly bodies that are so immense in size that we don't even have numbers. They're like a Google team, right? So then it's like, but meanwhile, like I just stubbed my toe, and I hope this girl texts me back, right? So then it's so it's just like there's something about being Chris Johnson or Tosin Abasi that actually has to like mute. You have to put all that other shit on mute in a weird way.
That's it. Okay, so you're hitting on a couple of really interesting things. So in that book with Carlo Rovelli, one of the kind of the things they get is that everyone has a personal blur, like and it's like the blurring of you have to put a certain amount of stuff on mute. It has to be blurred to you to contain. And,
your brain does this. It's a frame rate.
So all the things you don't know help make up who you are in a way, like your ignorance, your inability.
Ignorance,
is actually what shapes you in a way.
Yes, for the human suggestive experience, it seems that there's a wealth of information and stimulation that is actually like not helpful. Like, it's good that I'm not aware of every one of my mitochondria in my cells.
Totally.
It's good that I'm not that my gut biome is not like a super present like reality.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
But like, dude, that's what I mean. So these perspectives are so interesting simply because perspective matters. Where it's like you're mostly space, but you really could just punch me in the face, and it won't feel like mostly space punched me in the face.
No.
Yeah.
There's this like that's the things that I remember. One of my favorite books is The Way of the Peaceful Warrior by Dan Millman. Have you ever read that?
No.
It was put out in the 70s. And it's an iconic classic, right? And it's one of the things that the teacher in that story, Socrates, tells Dan. He says like three things. It's like paradox, humor, and change.
Nice.
Like, so these are the things that are like prevalent all through life, and if you can learn to kind of spot them and go with them, like then you'll always like be succeeding. You'll be on top of things. Like, you know, the fact is that you're right, but so am I. Okay, so that's part of what we're talking about. Like, you're stardust, but you got to take out the trash, bro. Oh, it's gonna stink.
Yeah.
Like you know, there's this. Yes, you're a cosmic being. Yes, this is a miracle.
You're a miracle.
You're a miracle, like everybody else.
Yeah.
Buddy. Like so.
Yeah.
So go to work. Be on time.
Yeah.
You know, like pay your bills, and then humor comes right after the paradox, because how fucking funny is that shit?
It's absurd.
That's absurd.
Yeah.
Right? So and then the third piece is change. Like it's always
Everything's
and that's part of our being a time-based being.
Yeah.
Like an experience in generating this experience of things passing and detecting and finding out that our cells in our body actually do reproduce themselves, and that we, as much as we might feel like almost the same person as the person that was just struggling to play the first Nirvana lick or tune on our power chord on our guitar, till now, where there's all this other adaptive ability that has come in over a long time.
Yeah. Well, I think the idea that you are a different person because your skin cells and all these things have cycled over and they're literally new cells is a partial truth, because there is continuity. Now you are evolving, but like there's a continuity in the change, and you can direct the change, but you're not a completely different person. I'm sure there's like parts of your personality that like were present when you were a child that are present now. And
Totally.
this goes the same with ability, cognitive ability, physical ability, all these things. Now you can in your life increase your physical ability to the capacity that you have, but I will never outlift the greatest, Russian Olympic weightlifter, no matter how much I train and eat like him or her, or whatever the case is. So, like, you're different in this beautiful sense that you can direct your evolution in a lot of ways. There is kind of a ceiling on it, unfortunately, just because, like,
Sure.
there's an infinite headroom in everyone's talent and intelligence. It's just...
Right.
It is what it is. That's why we're talking about Einstein and not like a trillion other Einsteins. It's like certain consciousnesses like emerge as being like outliers in this, but it's like you're always in a fluid state of change, but there's a continuity to it because you're always you, but you can always be a new you. I don't know. It's like
memory plays the main part in that, right?
Yeah,
the fact that now if you people that lose memory, that don't have great memory. Choose not to remember, so to speak. Like find a way. It's there as long as you have it, right? As long as you're able to retain it, so to speak. But like Jim Carrey, I don't know if you watched that. If you saw what he did when he did the thing, the comedy when he played the comedian. What's his name?
Oh, Andy Kaufman.
Andy Kaufman, right? Like, so I don't know if there's a special on Netflix that's about the behind the scenes of him playing Andy and how he stayed in character for so long and what he found out. Like, he never left character through that whole time. He was Andy Kaufman and both different versions of Andy Kaufman. And everybody had lost their shit dealing with Jim Carrey because he was so tough to deal with being Andy Kaufman. But on the other side of it, being interviewed about it, Jim's like, I lost myself for a good long while, and it made me realize. For him, he's like, I don't think personality is fixed. Like I don't think. I think it's totally adaptive, malleable. That's why, especially actors that find that flow state into the other life. They have that experience more often than like the average person that isn't necessarily trying to live double lives, right?
Yeah, or turn into different characters as like some sort of skill.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So it can be trained. It can be conditioned into something where you almost or maybe completely leave what was behind. In some ways, like thinking about it, caterpillar and butterfly. Like I'm curious. Like we don't know, but how much does the butterfly retain from the experience of being caterpillar? I don't know.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, the way I look at it, identity is that like it isn't purely like you're not purely socialized to be a certain way, but you're not purely a result of your like biology. But they have done psychological tests, and there are some physiological, empirical, observations that do say that, like, for instance, you inherit a good degree of certain traits from your parents.
Sure.
It could be openness to experience, or intelligence, or neuroticism, and these things do have a genetic sort of biological reality. But then you can also defeat a lot of this stuff by, like, repeated behaviors. So, like, being new characters all the time, or, like, facing fears, or, like, pushing yourself. So there is a malleability with being human that's totally real. But then there's also, you are living in this body that wants to stay alive and reproduce and, like, be happy, quote unquote. Like, so it's like always this dance between, like, nature and nurture and all that shit.
That's actually. That's a good lead in, because that part one of the things I like to ask is, like, what for you, what does it take to, like, to be happy? Like, what is to be happy, motivated, feel a feeling of balance, I guess. What does that look like for you?
I mean, I think for everyone it's different, but I think there are, like, there's, like, a hierarchy of needs, right? So are we talking about happiness beyond, well, like, obviously, like, food and shelter and all that shit, right?
Sure, yeah,
so,
you can, yeah, but I mean, when I think about, I would let you just interpret it however you want, like, because you're past the food and shelter thing. We're not talking about that, right? So in your current life, in your pervading now, what does it for you?
Connection. When you connect with someone and you experience that, I don't know if happiness is the word, but it's like it's like a type of sustenance. It's very, like, you feel acutely alive. You feel, like, alive in the moment, So I think connection and relationships, like, people who stoke you out, or people who make you think or challenge you, or people can make you happy. They can also make you fucking miserable,
Totally.
obviously. And then the flow states thing, where I'm realizing, like, I've had a string of interests that I spiral down rabbit holes in, and guitar is one of them, and I'm happy for that. Mm-hmm. But, like, like, you're like this too, like the yoga thing, but you're a musician, but you're also reading a bunch of stuff, and so I think we're seekers of, like, expansion and flow states, experiences of awe. Like, it's nice to go onto a mountaintop, feel really tiny, and feel like you are a blip in the radar of this, like, timeless landscape that's just been there for inconceivable amounts of time and change. And that does something. It's a relative experience of yourself to something that far exceeds you, and it gives you a type of context that, like, illuminates, like, a taste of eternity. It illuminates, like, the scale of existence in your relative point in this massive, almost inconceivable scale of existence. So that's a thing that produces happiness. I like human endeavors, like creative people, smart people, anything. Like, if I get to watch a sick new movie, or listen to sick new music, or see someone do a skateboard trick, and you're like, what the, you know what I mean? Or
feels like magic when you watch it a little bit.
Yeah. Anything that shows me, like, wow, humans are awesome. Mm-hmm. I'm like, dude, check out this dancer. You will never believe how this person can move.
Love watching dancers. Like,
yeah.
There was, I don't know, did you see a while back, this side note, like, there was if you haven't seen it, I'll find it and send it to you. There's this group of guys, like, on the subway in New York, and they just, like, throw a boombox on and they have a video, and they're just, like, using, like, the handles and everything as, like, they're, like, doing all this badass breaking and, like, spinning
and almost
around
like pole dancing,
almost like pole dancing and stuff. But they're like, they, like, let each one guy go, and then all of a sudden, like, they all go slow motion, and, like, and you're like, wait, what, did it slow down? And, like, then they're right back into it. And
wow.
It's like, speaking of human achievement, I'm just so impressed at where we've got with, like, kind of the hip hop, like, break dance. Like, I mean, those Jabberwocky guys, like, a while back, they blew up, like, just seeing that, like, illusion come to light is it's been fun.
Stuff like that. So I guess, like, but I'm realizing recently that, because the holidays just passed and stuff, and it's like, relationships, I think, are very important. They can be an extreme source of happiness. Like, hopefully they are. A lot of relationships bring people down, but the good ones can just be so, you know what I mean?
transforming, right? Like,
yeah, and like totally like this necessary focal point in your life, like, and it's a mirror for who you are too. So the right relationships can like show you like the best version of yourself, or hold you accountable, or push you to be better, or to make you want to strive. You know what I mean? Like, so
help you see the things that you can't see. Like it's like just out of peripheral range a lot of times. But when somebody's mirroring you in that way,
mm-hmm.
like, you got something over here, you know? Like,
mm-hmm.
you're like, wait, what? No, it's right. You don't see it, I know, because it's like a part of who you are. But I'm going to show them. But they can show you. They can see it, you know. And we can do it for other people. We do it all the time. We're like, did you know that you do this thing? Or like, you're like this in these scenarios? Oh, I was unaware. I had no awareness of that, you know.
Yeah, which is, you know, another slice of relativity, because you are who you are relative to other people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, like, it snapped because relationship and relativity are essentially, you know,
same word,
right?
Same root, you know, similar root concept.
Yeah.
Without endlessly expanding Einstein's general theory of relativity to just being anything we want it to be, but there's a continuum, and it's funny how persistent that idea is, even without trying to measure velocity. You know, it's kind of like,
well, we're in a world full of it. We don't, like, it's that basic concept of we have two spheres, and you can't. It's hard to tell which one's moving in relationship to the other one, right? Mm. Like, you can't in blank space.
Yeah.
There's this place, but you add a third one, then there's another point of, you know, relationship, right, to each other, and then there's like all these different ways of measuring these things, and through, and that's just like from our earliest memories. Like, we have this, we come from the parent, you know, the parental unit, you know, mother, father, or whatever that scenario is.
You are a child relative to mother, and you're a child relative.
Yeah, all these relational sequences begin to happen, and we get all these little mirrors, and then there's the conditioning that comes from trying to be what other people want us to be. That's an interesting part of the development.
This is why I think, like, we're at an interesting point, because I was talking about what reality would allow you to even be. Like, you know, I can't be a shaman anymore, really. I mean, I could try.
Yeah, you could.
But, like, there was a point in some cultures where it was perfectly legitimate to be, like, a member of the shaman class. And, like, but look, I'm speaking, like, there, you know, I'm not going to, like, get it. But what I'm saying is, like, we are expanding the scope of what it is available to humans to even be. You can be, I mean, dude, you know, if you get into the whole Kurzweil, like, sort of, like, singularity stuff, it's like,
yeah, it's crazy.
And you break free of the biological, like, it's like, so am I a man or am I a woman? Am I straight? Am I gay? Am I a member of, like, am I any of these things? Because we're starting to dissolve what used to be kind of, like, very real boundaries, and then we're pushing those limits further to where now, you know, you can be a member of new communities, you can be a participant in new identities, new there's just new shit for humans to even be. And it's a very strange thing to think about, that going back in time and that narrowing to where it's like, yeah, well, that sport hasn't been invented yet, so you can't be that.
Right.
Right. You know, like,
I mean, we're in an age where you can be an Instagram ass model and have millions of followers,
I'm
right?
Very thankful for this particular.
I mean, you know, speaking of things that you can be that you could not be just a mere 20 years ago.
Yep. Super
like,
new.
Not possible.
Uh-huh.
You could not get paid to sit, to lounge around, take pictures of your ass.
In yoga pants.
Or not.
Yeah.
You know, and post it, and, like, and that be kind of how you subsist in life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, and circling back, though, I would argue that you are a shaman to a degree, because of the dedication to a focus, because what you have to share is you know, a part of and trying to point at and express the ineffable. You know, and the shaman historically in a lot of cultures was really the one that just had some plant medicine knowledge through one way or another, through divining or whatever, and was able to kind of be that conduit between heaven and earth in a way, and offer a different perspective.
Yeah.
And you offer a really unique perspective that, like, I mean, I remember when you first broke out. I mean, 10 years ago. I was thinking about this the other day, actually, because it's been just about 10 years since we first met, and I remember the feeling the first time because I watched all of your videos, right? Like, and I was like when I was at Mackie and Ampeg, and I was like, dude, and it was fun. And I think, I know it was you that introduced me to Misha. That's right. Like, I remember that, but I forget even how I connected with you, but. I might have just emailed you through one of the things at the time, but I remember like watching you play that night up in Seattle at the I think it's El Corazon or something. It was on like the Dredge tour or something. Yeah, remember that?
Shout out to Dredge.
Yeah, right, Dredge. That's sick. But I had this distinct feeling like that night. Like I had that's part of something I'm still trying to figure out. Like I have premonition about things.
Yeah.
Some things are obvious. You can do the math, and it's like it's not really a premonition. But some things just like have this a greater sense of something, right? And you're like, I don't know exactly how I know this, but I kind of know this. Mm-hmm. And there was a thing that I felt in that performance that I was just like, number one, I was like super stoked to be at this point in history where this was happening.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
That's cool.
You know, like where I was looking on stage and was like, fuck, okay, we've had all this other stuff, we've had all the Metallicas, and Meshuggah in so many ways was like the apex for so many things.
Yeah.
Like being
super innovative, and like,
we didn't know that was ever going to exist when, Ride the Lightning came out, like that didn't make those.
You couldn't have predicted.
You couldn't be Meshuggah, right? You couldn't do it. And then so then there's somebody like yourself comes along and says, oh, I'm synthesizing all these different things, and then I'm giving back in a different way. And I saw this different thing that night, and I just like, that was really interesting to see somebody actualize. Anytime somebody does something that I'm just like you're talking about, does the kickflip, does the dance, does the that takes you and helps you see something differently and blows your mind to a point where you're like, dude, you might be magic. You might not actually be. I don't know if we're the same
type of
human or whatever, right? Yeah. Like you pushed it to a degree where we're not sure anymore.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting, and it's like it starts creating the new neural pathways because when somebody else does it,
they show you what's possible.
Yeah, and then it's like it lets everybody else, and that's that kind of classic scenario where if everybody's all uptight and holding down, tamping down emotion in your life, and one person comes along and it's just a free spirit and it's sharing and open, you're like, wow, I didn't even know that was possible, that you could live a life that way, be that expressive. And it gives permission. It says, I don't have to be like those other people, and I don't have to do it that way. To see a new way, it says, it sparks creativity, sparks all kinds of interesting copycats too. Like that's the thing I've noticed too, that you and the way you have. Spawned out. Dude, there's like a whole legion of folks that you have influenced now.
Yeah.
What does that feel like?
It feels really cool, especially when they go beyond what I've done. I've seen certain players.
Who would you say that has done something like that? Do you have a point of reference?
I mean, there's this guy Rupam. Who's doing a lot of, like, some techniques that I kind of, like, stumbled upon. And I think he's studying at Berkeley, but he's doing this, the Surrealist is his band name.
Oh, okay.
I'll send you some links, but it's really cool because I think he has his own sense of harmony and his own sort of, like, sensibilities and aesthetic. But I think I might have influenced him to really fiercely define that and take it to this, like, he does a lot of beautiful harmony that isn't like super placeable. It isn't simply like major or simply minor. It's like this in-between space. And he's asking of the guitar new sounds and textures. So he's doing like a lot of like harmonics with the right hand, and but in an arpeggiated like context.
Whoa.
And so it's stuff you haven't heard before. It's like crystal raindrops, and you know, it's like, but he's getting these sounds. Yeah, and I'm just like, okay, this is that like sort of like he's pushing the bound of the, he's pushing the edge of, because you can't call it a certain genre,
right?
But you feel it, and it's almost like it's like a new expression. So it's cool, but yes, technique wise, and he's using more than 6 strings, and you know what I mean. So there's some relation to what I do, but dude, there's a lot of people. I mean, I feel like I'm on the spot, but there's tons of players who, I don't know. I'm not a singular influence like the people that I would maybe name. I think I might be one of many influences that they have, but
sure.
I think just the extended range community in general, and then certain techniques and wanting to get good at like certain techniques in harmony. I think I definitely was a guy who, like, part of my whole bag is like, hey, you guys seen this technique before, and have you heard this type of harmony? And look at, you know what I mean? That's very different than if you're just a Van Halen fan. You know what I mean? And he was like a huge explosion. But I think those explosions continue to happen. So whatever influence I have, it's like, it's really wonderful to see that it isn't just me as an anomaly, but it actually has inspired other people to like also kind of explore new territory on guitar.
Dude, I agree, and I have to say that I think that before you kind of like launched onto the scene with that first record and started hitting the touring circuit in that way, pretty sure that there was that moment where it's like, dude, 8-string guitars, like those are only for Meshuggah, like only for them, and like and a couple of like in kind of like just genty type bands that weren't really expressing in any type of real melodic way.
Yeah.
And then you showed up and it was like, okay, well, now it's it from a perspective of a manufacturer, because I've worked in the business for so long, and then seeing the trends ebb and flow, I'm like, okay, 8-string guitar, totally staying.
It's gonna be a thing.
It's gonna be a thing now. Like with Tosin and Javier doing this. Like, you know, and it's exploded.
It was
the thing that we were like, oh, it's a fad, it's totally going to go away. No.
Well, that's funny, because the industry's perspective is an excellent metric for what sticks in the concrete sense, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like the 8-string, Ibanez was making an 8-string on a production level you could buy, but no one else really was. And I remember the subsequent years, it's like, oh, dude, ESP has an 8-string. Oh, dude, like Schecter has an 8-string. Oh, dude, you know what I mean? It's like
I watched the whole thing. It was the same. Like, well, when you were playing some super custom guitars in the beginning, right? Like, so you wouldn't get an off the shelf thing.
No, you had no real off the shelf. Conklin, that was boutique stuff. I was broke.
Conklin, I remember like
Rusty
salivating
in the fucking Conklins he was shredding.
So crazy. Do you see his newest one?
It's a Dean or what?
No, they didn't. Well, he's been with Dean for a long time. He just signed with Ormsby. Ormsby is doing. They're about to drop the new Rusty Cooley signature.
Cool.
Right? It's just a sketch. Like, they haven't actually like shown the actual guitar yet. But
really?
It's like
they posted it?
27 fret fan fret. Super close pickups.
Wow.
It's basically a hype machine.
Yeah.
Hype machine style. But it looks like way. I mean, his other guitars were pretty cool, but this one's ill.
Yeah, dude, Rusty is definitely concerned with playing the notes fast and having an instrument that facilitates that. So
yeah.
No, so it's still evolving, but there's an interesting evolution with bands like Chon and Polyphia, who are almost like metal isn't the substrate of like what they're doing. So like with Animals as Leaders and Periphery and like Tesseract and Between the Buried and Me, it's like progressive musicianship, but metal is the ecosystem, right? But now I'm seeing bands, young, great guitar players, but metal isn't the foundation of where they're working. They're working in a whole different
space.
Dude,
that guy, Josh Martin and Little Tybee.
Oh, man. I love what they do.
That dude that whole band kills me.
They're phenomenal.
On so many levels. And such sweet people. Like, if you ever get a chance to hang out with Little Tybee, especially in Atlanta, do it.
I should have hit him up.
Great people, super uber creative. Brock Scott, the singer, he does a lot of like the kind of content and theoretical design, because he's a film major, and like he's the one. Anything that looks kind of like super high end filmy, that's him. Like
Yeah.
he's the one that's putting all that together, right? Like he's a master, and like he's got all these really cool storylines for the next album thing that he was explaining to me. I'm not even going to say anything about it because it's going to be so cool, like the way
Nice.
they drop it. But kind of in the way that Devin Townsend did like Ziltoid type stuff. Like they've got their own kind of like concept story thing that they're going to do. It's really neat. But I back to the guitar, like Josh just being a guy that doesn't really use much drive. Has an 8-string guitar and is using all these different techniques.
Tons of new techniques.
That actually suit songs, like lyrical songs that are, you know, I consider them prog folk or something. Like, but to see an 8-string electric guitar in that band,
You see it, and it's not even like, I don't know how to explain. Sometimes you see an 8-string guitar, and it's all about the fact that it has 8 strings.
Right.
This happened with extended range. Like, I mean, I'm not. It's a band like Korn. You were acutely aware that the guitars had more than 6 strings and were tuned low.
Right.
Because at virtually every moment, you're kind of being.
You're being barraged.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think part of the industry perspective you were talking about, were like, oh, the 8-string thing. There's a sentiment that it's like, oh, that's a fad, and it might be because the people at the time who were using it. I mean, even bands like Meshuggah, like, you're aware that their guitars have more than 6 strings and they're tuned low.
Yep.
And that is central to the sound. But you listen to Little Tybee, and there are moments where he's in the upper register. You just don't. It's not beating you over the head that it's a guitar that goes to, like, you know, as low as a bass.
Dude, if I just played that band for anybody that, whether you play guitar or not, you wouldn't be shocked by the guitar playing in it. Like, it fits. It fits. It's like they're a cohesive band that just like writes for the song still. Like, and I find because I would put the music on and listen to it, and, you know, of course, part of my analytical mind goes to wanting to pick out and listen to what the technique is on the guitar. But so often I find myself forgetting about that and getting lost in the song because they're playing so well.
Well, the music is good enough, so it escapes the novelty trap, and that's another criticism that would be like, you know, kind of thrown at the extended range guitars. Like, oh, that's a novelty. I still like encounter traditionalists. They're like, why do you need 8 strings? I'm like, if you have to ask yourself that question, you're not the type of person who.
Yeah, you're not.
You know what I mean?
It's not really your thing.
It's so funny, like, how arbitrary boundaries can be. I mean, it's kind of like, well, there's a folk tradition of 7-string guitar, like in Russia and in Brazil, or the lute had 10 strings. So it's kind of like, well, you've been told that the guitar only has 6 strings and is tuned to A440, and anything else is like, well, what are you doing? But it's also like, I've seen bass players like Evan Brewer and Victor Wooten do things that I'm like, I have to learn how to do that. I wasn't like, oh, that's a bass, so I'm not gonna. I'm like, he has strings and frets and hands, and I have strings and frets and hands, and we're making music. And so anyone who's like, why do you need 8 strings? I'm like, oh, you're working within like a very narrow like perception of what the guitar should do. Right. And you're probably not someone who's really gonna, maybe you'll innovate on the 6 string and that's fine, but the question illuminates to me that like there are certain types of people who are definitely more traditional, and that's fine. I'm just not one of them. So.
Well, and I mean, to be fair, it's for the average person that doesn't have the vantage point that we have, as far as like knowing the primary players in the scene, having a feeling or a concept of like who's out doing what, you know, with the things. The average person that just knows about Led Zeppelin and AC/DC, and they want to get into guitar, and like that's a real question, right? Like why do you need more than 6?
Well, what did Jimmy Page play?
Yeah, and because I could hear it both ways. I can hear it as you know, why? You know, like that doesn't. My mind's blown, and like, why do you need extra strings, dude? That's lame because a guitar isn't that. You know, like you need.
Well, how about why don't you need extra strings?
Yeah, see, that's how you flip it. That's how you flip it.
Yeah.
Well, one of the other thing I like to talk about is we've talked about a lot of artists actually on this like conversation, but I'm curious if there's anything right now that you're into music-wise that that's like kind of maybe obscure or like lesser known that you'd want to shout out that should be better known because you're just like, kind of blown away by it.
I mean, this guitar player Antoine Boyer,
Okay.
young French guy who does. It's almost like sounds like Baroque classical.
Whoa.
He uses a pick and he plays on like. He's collaborated with some like sort of Django gypsy jazz sort of guys, but he has an album of solo compositions and arrangements, and it's just him, and it's masterful level counterpoint and arrangement, and it's mind expanding. It's localized within like classical harmony and aesthetic, but he's doing it all on a 6-string, and he's executing things that like would. We were talking about fear earlier. Bro, this guy is, and it's beautiful. It's like virtuosic level, but it's also beautiful because a lot of times virtuosos, I don't know, if on guitar they stand out to me in the metal space, and it's like a lot of, dynamically there's not much going on. A lot of times it's fast and it's heavy and it's aggressive, and that's why you're playing fast.
Right.
But when you hear like someone like use dynamic in the middle of a 30-second note run, or you hear them, there's such a huge range because there's no distortion, and so now it's virtually an acoustic instrument, and so there's so much more detail translated. It's kind of on that virtuoso level in the classical sense, where you hear like a solo cellist and you're like gonna weep. You're like, there's so much detail and consideration to dynamic and all these things. So, and I feel like he's in his early 20s.
Did you say that he primarily plays with a pick and not?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So that's different for a classical style player because there's very few doing that.
It's insane music. I call it brain food because there's some music you listen to and it's like
Just so expansive.
Yeah, you got to hear the song countless times to even get to, and then like you keep listening and you keep noticing more. It's one of those things where it's like, damn, like you're on board. You're not passively listening for, like, if you tune in, there's a lot for you. So he's phenomenal. But I mean, it's like bands like Hiatus Coyote who like, I think Napalm is like one of my favorite songwriters ever.
So dope.
Oh,
dude, and you got to hang out with her.
Yeah.
I recently just met her and hung out with her right before she had her surgery, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Did you hear about that?
I did, and like, she seems to really be like battling that with like a ton of like strength, but she's like kind of a magical person to me.
It's total
You
magic.
know what
Are
I
you
mean?
kidding me? Like, she's super magical.
Yes.
One of my favorite bands on the planet. Easy.
One of my favorite bands, and even if she didn't make me, like her sense of personal style and like her personal story,
Yeah.
she was like this pet bird,
Oh, tell me. I
and
don't
it
know.
loves her.
Really?
And it just flew to her one day. I think she was in a park, and he just like flew.
Just out of the blue, she had a bird just show up?
Yeah, I think it might have been so. It's not like a wild bird. It looks like one of these tropical birds that like we now use as pets or whatever. But I think if I'm remembering the story correctly, like she just like encountered this bird and like it's like her companion, and he totally loves her. And it's funny to see this relationship. She's just like enchanted. That's
Yeah.
I have so much like love and respect for her. So yeah.
Same. Oh, that's cool. That's good that one comes up on your radar.
Yeah. But I also think people like, this might sound funny, but I like Drake quite a bit.
Yeah?
Yeah. And I mean, lately I've been listening to a lot of like top 40.
You hipped me to the Carters.
When
we were in New York.
Play one of those songs.
Yeah, that one tune with the Fast Like a Lambo. That you had that tune in the Uber when we were in New York. I didn't recognize. I didn't know who it was. I just like put it on. I found it and started like listening to it every once in a while, and still didn't know who it was. I didn't know it was like Jay-Z and Beyonce.
Yeah.
It's like it's somebody else. I was playing it for somebody else to like. Who's the Carters? I don't know. Like wasn't even paying. Like, but it's funny because her voice is obviously familiar. When I went back, I was like, oh,
obviously.
I'm like I'm such a dullard sometimes. Like I didn't think, out of context, I didn't think about it.
That's funny. No, I gotta mention Tigran Hamasyan.
Yeah. You actually had mentioned them before.
Yeah.
What would
I know that you know about him. I mean, but on this list that you're asking me about, like,
what would you recommend to check out?
either Mockroot or there's a YouTube video of them performing Mockroot live, and the shit they're doing live might rival what they recorded.
Oh shit! Really?
Yeah, masterful.
Okay.
Just some of the grooves and oftentimes a very strong improvisational player might, in my opinion, not have as strong of a compositional component. So they can play over anything, but they're not writing Bohemian Rhapsody, right?
Right.
Then there are guys who really merge improvisation with some structure, and so there's really cool patterns, really cool grooves, and memorable shit. And then there's moments where they're just like flowing over. And Tigran is one of these guys who does that. But then he takes it even further because as a pianist, he's referencing progressive metal and Meshuggah specifically with some of the rhythms.
Yeah,
some of the rhythms you've only heard Meshuggah do really, but it's like grand piano. But then he's taking that even further because, he's Armenian, and I think there's some folk harmony that's entering that space. And it's one of the most unique sounds, and it's also like super compelling on tons of levels, and it's super original. So Tigran is like dope.
Sick. That's a good list.
Yeah.
Man.
Car Bomb. Listen to Car Bomb.
Dude, Car Bomb kills. I remember I found Car Bomb like in like 99 or 2000. Like I was running a metal. I was the metal buyer for Tower Records in Chico for a little while. So I had my own little metal section. Like
you got paid to buy metal CDs?
Yeah, to like buy and stock that metal because like normally Tower actually it depended on it was like.
It was regional?
It was regional, like what the boss there would let you do. And I came in with such a metalhead in my early 20s, and I was like very snooty about it too. So I was like, I was always trying to find the shit that nobody knew about. And so when the metal kids would come in and be like, oh, you like that? Whatever, you should listen to this, and just be the total snooty, like almost Jack Black character, like in High Fidelity, where like just like you're not. I can't even sell this to you because you're this is dumb. You're not worthy of it or whatever. But but I found Car Bomb back then. I found was it Candiria too? Like the early stuff, like Process of Self-Development.
Yes,
that's one of my favorite.
300% Density. That stuff had a huge. They pushed the boundary. To me, they're not even a genre. I mean, it was localized in metal, but there was parts with trumpet and like swing and like the patterns, like dude. And it's funny. I don't talk about them that often, but they were like a huge influence as far as like what can you do? What are the rules? Yeah. They were a band. They're like fuck all the rules.
Fuck all the rules. Yeah. That made me. Talk. That's brain food for me too. Because like when they incorporate not only like elements of East Coast hip hop, but like the New York jazz scene in the Brooklyn, really localized. They've always been like a localized band for the most. They've toured, but it's like their music is about where they live. So much. Even the last record when they came back, it's still.
I haven't heard that one.
It's great. It's a great record. But it still feels like it's still localized in a way, like lyrically and just kind of.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Because they were part of a real before the internet, bands had to grow organically in a local scene, and then that would like grow to regional, and then maybe national and international, and maybe press could help break you quicker. But bands like Candiria, it's like a New York sound, and they're like a New York culture, and it's probably intractable at this point. But now they're bands that like maybe the members have like they put out an album, they've never been in the same room together, and then it goes kind of viral. It's a very different sort of thing, but it used to be like super organic and localized, and you'd be like, yeah, dude, there was New York hardcore, there's like Florida death metal, there's like, you go to Southern California and there's like, you have your 18 Visions and your Atreyus and your freaking, you know what I mean? And I remember touring the US pre-internet days, and like, in the hardcore scene, and every scene was the same and different. Like, there was certain styles, and we're all hardcore kids, but you'd have different sounds, regionally. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Montreal's produced a lot of tech death and a lot of, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and the whole Seattle sound. Obviously.
Scandinavia, obviously, with metal. Yeah, so it's pretty interesting.
What a trip. Well, there's that relativity thing too. It's in relationship to where you come from and who you're influenced by in your locality. Like, it means a lot. It meant a lot more before.
Oh my God. Now the internet is local.
We're a homogenized
It's like,
scenario.
bro, if you want to learn guitar now and you just go on Google, it's like, God help you. It's like all the things are available to you now.
Yeah.
Name a scale. Okay, here you go.
YouTube
Find a video
has
on it. Okay.
Yeah.
Find a guy like, it's just like crazy.
Yeah, you didn't have high def up close footage of Eddie Van Halen and Jimi Hendrix available at your fingertips. You
Yeah.
either went out to the show, or maybe years down the road they released something as MTV came in, you know. And
How about this? Someone learning guitar today is like has accessible to them all the greatest players, and it's kind of like at a fingertip and like ad nauseum. Like, but I remember I didn't hear Yngwie Malmsteen until I'd been playing guitar for like 5 or 6 years, and it was, I think I went into a music store. And the guy knew I was like kind of getting good and was like recommending stuff. So there was an instructional tape and he was on it. But I'd never heard Sweet Picking or neoclassical because it wasn't on classic rock radio. It wasn't on like alternative rock radio. It wasn't on MTV. And those were the only places you could get it. I mean, if you're a 12-year-old living in Gaithersburg, Maryland, like I'm sure there was some magazine that if I was super cool and knew the right record store, I could get some magazine that had it. But I didn't have an older brother who grew up in the hair metal days who could be like, bro, you gotta listen to fucking, you know? So
I was gonna say, that's the caveat, is having an older brother or a friend's older brother.
Or a dad.
Yeah, or somebody that can pass it down, yeah.
But now it's like, like an algorithm will recommend it to you. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Which, strangely enough, even though it is more, because you know, I lived and breathed and worked in record stores for years. It was my way of staying true. Like I worked a ton of shitty jobs for a long time, all kinds of different jobs, and then it was like I don't want to do anything but like stuff that has to do with music, you know. And if I get a discount on my music, then I didn't. So I stay in that realm, and it kind of felt like. You know, that was part of a community, right? Like you would go to that place, and if you didn't know what you were looking for, there was somebody that worked there. You'd be like, you know, I'm looking for something like this. And I had all these conversations in my life before I ever worked at a music store. I remember going in, I knew this one guy, Frank, that worked at Camelot in Chico. I'm like, dude, I really love Testament, man. What's new? Like, has it got anything thrashy? And he'd be like, yo, check it out. Slipknot, this new band. I'm like, Slipknot? They're like, yeah, it's 9 people. I remember the day that I found out about Slipknot because I was in Camelot Music, and he was like, they all look crazy, it's kind of weird, but like it's a good record. I think you're gonna like it, and it's catchy too. And I'm like, dude, what? I'm like,
I was a big Slipknot fan.
Yeah, it was like Korn and thrash. Like if you kind of thrashed up Korn more, like you would get Slipknot.
Yeah,
I was like,
that's a good little breakdown.
I was like, all right, that's cool. I can handle that.
And I'd be nostalgic for that type of dynamic too, where you had like kind of a local expert, like kind of like hipping you to new things. Now it's kind of like for fans of, you know, like your Spotify is going to be plugged into an algorithm that will just like endlessly link you to new things. There's a new dynamic emerging where people don't even know who they're hearing because they just put it on like, you know,
the Pandora,
Drake
radio,
yeah, and then there's all these artists being thrown at them, and it's kind of background music in a way because it's all curated so well that it works. And maybe, I don't know, some people stop and pause and see who it is, but I've talked to a lot of people. There's so much music available now, and it's being delivered through like this automated system, right, where an algorithm will take your preferences and just feed you what it thinks you'll like. And there are people who don't know who they're listening to, or they can't really name the wealth of new music, but they're listening to it. They just don't know it's this person or that person.
Right.
They know their favorites, but there's stuff they're hearing that they fuck with that they're like,
But that's kind of like radio. That happened in the radio days too.
I know.
You didn't have the information always available to, but I remember my mom. I know so many people around me that, I don't know, I heard that song on the radio. I mean, who is it? Who is this one that does the da 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 da? You know, like, Mom, like, whatever.
Yeah.
She's listening to the popular music, but she doesn't know who it is. So that person still kind of exists in a way, right?
Yeah, but I guess what I'm describing, I had a friend who listened to electronic music, and he would always know the producer or whoever he was listening to.
Right.
And then a few years later, I hung out with him, and he's like, dude, I don't know, I can't keep track of all this stuff. And he just puts on a station, and he likes most of it because he's into house, right?
Right.
And so it is what it is, but he used to be someone who, like, because you have to... if you're a passive listener, there'd be the radio, and you might not know who's on the radio, but whatever your collection was shit that you consciously bought.
Right.
Now you don't have to consciously buy anything per se,
No.
and so there are people. The idea of owning music. I mean, have you thought about this? It's like, what do you mean, owning? And it went in stages. It was like, okay, well, you would own. In my case, it'd be CDs,
right.
And you'd have one of these leather-bound books that had rows and rows of CDs, and it would be like super cool. And God forbid it got stolen, someone broke into your car and stole your CD booklet, right?
Happened to me, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because all the music you can listen to is like physically bound within the leather, walls of this book. And then it translates to digital media where you could have memory that could hold X amount of songs. And so you'd have a collection of music on your iPod or whatever the case is. Or if you were a Napster person, you'd have a hard drive with music on it. And I remember talking to a guy who worked in tech, and he's just like, yeah, I don't even think people are going to have that anymore. And he's right. Now everyone streams everything, and the thought of owning a song, like, what are we even talking about owning? So you own some ones and zeros that you can choose to play on this device as opposed to playing it, accessing it from the cloud at any point in time, from any point in space. Like, where's my iPod? Isn't that a thing people say anymore?
No.
It's like all the music that's being made is invisibly hovering around you. And the idea of owning it is kind of niche.
We're curators now. We're like the best of us. I would say, even the worst, I guess. But and that's how I view myself at this point, because I make playlists for this podcast, for every episode. So that's something that will happen for this one.
Cool.
All the things that we list, But I make for yoga. I make playlists all the time, and I'm a Spotify-holic. I pay for premium, and I use the shit out of it. I have over 50 playlists over the last year and a half or 2 years of teaching yoga that are numbered, and I go back and it's different mixes for different kind of hot and sweaty yoga things, right? And because I've been curating music for the general public that goes to those classes, I was already into pop anyway, and I like hip hop, and I like, but then it changes. It's like, the directive now is to have a positive mental attitude for the most part. I want to have it be a dynamic thing, and I end up curating through all this yoga music too that kind of bookends it and puts a little meditation spin on it here and there. There's all these different things around curating. I'm absolutely in love with the scenario at this point, because all I have to take is my phone, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, when I'm at home, I'm really a fan of vinyl. I have a nice record player, and I have a small collection, and it's like the ability to unplug from that and not have a computer on at all in the house, have it all turned off, and just have that and be cooking.
And it allows you to focus. It's kind of like, this is a weird analogy, but it's like, with dating, you can swipe and make these matches and have an endless string of these connections, or you could be localized and focus on one person. And I feel with a fixed number of vinyl records in a physical space in your living room with your record player, you're turning down all the noise, and you're choosing from one of the 20 records you have, and you're putting that on, and the next track isn't going to magically be a completely different record. It's going to be the body of work that's on that physical record, sitting on that player, and it's a nice contrast to the boundless availability. I'm a person who suffers from option paralysis.
Same.
I sometimes I do better with less. Give me less options. I like menus that are small. You know what I mean?
Same. Oh man, I just want to get it done. That's just with an amp, I always use the analogy, Mesa Boogie has made some cool stuff, but they're the one amp company you can always count on that has 20 switches on it that you don't necessarily.
It's really remarkable.
It's great. It's phenomenal, but I've always gravitated to a simpler simpler setup. I have a little less options. I just wanted to tweak it and get it to the right place, but But you're right. It's nice to kind of let it all just fade into the back and just put a record on and listen to a full album. That's the other thing about the album is the physical touching of the case, you know, like the fold and like pulling it out of the sheath and putting it on. You have to actually be that committed that you're going to physically, you know, touch something other than just press a button and walk away from it and let it like curate for you.
And I think that it reminds me of how we are not purely just like the thoughts and ideas in our heads, the biological reality of what we are. We do like tactile things. We like sensory input. We do relate, you know, the smell of a book or the artwork of a you know, cover, or the repetitive sort of action of like placing the needle and setting the thing on, and then you sit and then you hear some noise and then you hear the song. All these things are, to me, that's part of like, you know, we were talking about like, are you your body or are you the other thing? But it's you can't actually separate them. You're the totality of like the fact that you are part of this physical world, even though you're mostly space and you are mostly thoughts. But then you also are like, man, sex or good food or a joint or whatever. There's these things that are totally biological hacks that are like on the short list of the best shit you can subjectively experience. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like,
that's what it is.
Speaking of which, no.
Yeah, I know. Well, I think we should probably cap it. This might be the longest one.
We went in, bro.
Yeah.
Players Pick Podcast, Picks and Perspective with Chris Johnson.